Hello, and welcome to our series on epidemic reporting in R. In this lesson, we'll be learning how to create demographic pyramids for epidemiological analysis. We'll be using the ggplot2 package in order to create these plots. A demographic pyramid, also known as a population pyramid or an age-sex pyramid, is often used to visualize the distribution of a population by two important demographic variables, age and sex. Today, you'll learn the importance of demographic pyramids in order to study disease patterns and how to create them with ggplot2 package in R. So let's get into it. Here are the detailed learning objectives for this lesson. Feel free to pause and read through them here, but we'll come back to them at the end of the lesson and check them off in detail. So what are demographic pyramids? They're a type of graph that show the distribution of a population by age and sex. The graph is divided down the center by male and female members of the population. The y-axis shows the population and the x-axis shows the sex. The overall plot often takes the shape of a pyramid, hence the name of the graph. For example, in this graph, we see the country has a young population, which means the bars at the bottom are wider and get narrower as we go up. Hence, it makes a pyramid shape. A population pyramid has three key features. The first is age groups. As we saw earlier, the pyramid is divided into horizontal bars, each showing a particular age group. The age groups are often divided into 5-year increments, such as 0 to 4, 5 to 9, and so on. The second key feature of demographic pyramids is gender representation. The left side of the plot typically represents males, and the right side of the plot typically represents females. This allows for a quick comparison of the gender distribution across age groups. The third key feature is population size. The length of the bars represents the size of the population of that age group. A longer bar represents a larger population in that age group. We can use ggplot2 to create these pyramids and customize them as we wish. Our target plot for the end of the lesson looks like this one. We'll be plotting the age-sex distribution of HIV cases in Zimbabwe from 2016. When analyzing disease patterns, it's important to look at age and sex-specific vulnerability to diseases. We often want to consider how different diseases affect individuals from different age groups or different sexes differently. Studies have shown that the incidence of TB, HIV, and malaria vary by age and sex, and these age-sex patterns differ by geographic area. We know that the incidence of certain communicable diseases can vary with age. For example, tuberculosis in Africa primarily affects younger age groups. However, in countries where tuberculosis incidence is significantly lower, like in the United States, it's primarily older age groups that are affected by the disease and immunocompromised individuals. Another disease that shows age variation is malaria, where children under 5 account for the large majority of deaths in Africa. HIV is a sexually transmitted virus, so we see age patterns in this disease. Particularly, we see an increase in cases at age groups in the late teens, usually in the onset of puberty and increased sexual activity. We also see sex-specific patterns in HIV, with females having higher incidence, lower age groups like 20s to 40s, and males having higher incidence in older age groups, 40 and above. This could be due to biological vulnerability, sexual activity, or social and economic factors. Observing the distribution of disease burden by age and sex can help to inform national surveillance programs. By identifying which groups are most vulnerable to the disease, we can also inform public health interventions and choose which groups to target. Demographic pyramids can also play a crucial role in assessing data quality of national surveillance systems by helping assess internal and external consistency. External consistency can be evaluated by comparing national surveillance data with global metrics of the same disease. This tells us if the data quality is good and if the national surveillance systems are reliable. Let's take a closer look at our target demographic pyramid and break down how it can be graphed with ggplot2. As you can see, the x-axis is divided into two halves, males and females, which are plotted in opposite directions starting at 0. The units on the x-axis are symmetrical on either side. You can see that it starts from 320 to 320 on either side, and the age groups are labeled along the y-axis. In other words, we can think of it as two bar graphs, one for males and one for females. If we look at just the female half of the pyramid with the axes flipped 90 degrees, you can see that it looks like a regular bar graph, which we know how to plot with geomcol and ggplot2. A demographic pyramid can also be thought of as a specialized version of a stacked bar chart. In a traditional stacked bar chart, the segments are piled on top of each other, starting at 0 and extending outward in one direction. In contrast, a demographic pyramid plots the segments back to back along a central axis. This axis represents a point of division between the two categories, male and female. The bars extend in opposite directions to illustrate the number of cases of each gender. When we start plotting in the next section, you'll notice that the code in ggplot looks quite similar to how we plot a traditional stacked bar chart, the chart on the left, but we need to move the bars to align them to the middle of the x-axis. We do this by negating the male counts so that they go to the left side starting from 0. We'll then change the x-axis labels so that the left side doesn't show up as negative but shows up as the positive x-axis values. This will make more sense as we get into the examples, so let's start coding. Now that we have our conceptual foundation and a clear idea of exactly the kind of plot we want to get, it's time to start coding. We'll begin by loading the required packages for this lesson. We'll start with the tidyverse package for data manipulation. As usual, we need the tidyverse package for data manipulation and plotting. This package includes dplyr, ggplot2, and reader, which we'll use for reading data, plotting, and data wrangling, and data preparation. We need the here package for project relative file paths, which will help us easily locate files, and the apyramid package, which is a package dedicated to plotting demographic pyramids. Now let's run this code chunk to load and install the packages in R. So if you haven't taken a TGC course before, in TGC lessons, we use the function pload from pacman rather than using install packages and library from base R. This is because pacman pload both installs and loads the packages. For example, if you don't have the apyramid package already installed on your computer, you don't need to use both install packages and library. Both can be done in a single step. The next step is data preparation. We're going to import the data, inspect the variables, and then do some data wrangling in order to get the CSV into the correct format for plotting a demographic pyramid. We'll be using a dataset of simulated lined list cases of Zimbabwe HIV cases from 2016. The simulated data is based on a WHO epidemic report from Zimbabwe. For this lesson, we've extracted just the age and sex-related variables from the dataset. Let's start by importing the data into our RStudio environment and taking a closer look at the variables. We'll use the read CSV function from reader to load the dataset, and we can print the data frame and look at variables. Our imported dataset has 28,000 rows and 3 columns: age group, sex, and HIV status. The age groups increase in 5-year increments, going 0 to 4, 5 to 9, and so on. There are 2 sexes, male and female, And HIV status also has two values, positive or negative. Since we are interested in creating a demographic pyramid of HIV prevalence, we need to first filter the data to only include individuals with an HIV positive status. We can use the filter function from the dplyr package in order to do this. Now when we run this code, we'll create a new data frame called HIV cases. If we view the data frame, it has the same three variables as before, but there's only positive cases in the HIV status column. Next, let's create a summary table showing the total number of cases per age group and sex. To create this aggregated table, we can use the count function from dplyr. I'm going to pass HIV cases to count and specify that I want to aggregate it by age group and sex. Running this code will yield this table. A key thing to notice is that the age groups are in ascending order. It goes from 0 to 4, 5 to 9, and so on. This is crucial when you're plotting a demographic pyramid. If the factor is not in ascending order, then your plot, the bars in your plot, won't be correctly ordered either. So in your data, if the data is not in ascending order, you need to make sure this is the case, and you can use factor relevel from forcats in order to reorder the factor levels. This will ensure that in your demographic pyramid, the youngest age group will be plotted at the bottom of the x-axis, and the oldest age group will be plotted at the top of the x-axis. The next step in data preparation is to group the line list by age and sex and calculate the total number of cases for each of those groups. This aggregated table that we're going to create is going to look similar to the one we just saw, the frequency table that we created with the count function. Our final summary table is going to look like this one. We have 28 rows and 5 columns. There are 28 rows because we have 14 age groups and 2 sexes per age group. So we've already seen the first 3 variables before when we used the count function. Now we're going to add 2 more columns. There's a column called axis counts where we have positive female totals and negative male totals. This is so that the bars can be plotted in opposite directions on the plot, and we'll soon see how that works. The last column is called axis percent, and it has the total counts but as a percentage of the full number of cases. The reason I named these variables axis counts and axis percent is because we don't actually have a negative number of cases. That's not possible. The reason it says axis counts is simply for the purposes of plotting on the negative side of the axis. That's why they're called axis counts and not total counts. We can use the count and mutate functions from dplyr to get totals for each group and then transform the male values to be negative. To create the summary table, you can code along with me in your Code Along RMD. So we'll start by naming the dataset, naming it pyramid data, and then we take the HIV cases data frame, which is our line list, and then we pass it to the count function, and we put the same variables that we used in the count function before, so age group and sex. But this time we give it a name. So we give the total column name. And then I'm just going to run this section of code so you can see what the output looks like. So here we have age group and sex and the total. So now we need to add 2 more columns, axis counts and axis percent. So we're going to use mutate, which creates new columns. And so in mutate, I create the axis counts column. And I'm going to say if sex equals male, I want negative of the total column, and else I just want it normal. So the else is for female columns. It can just be total. And to get the axis percent column, we do 100 times axis counts, the one that we just created with the positive and negative male values, and divide it by the total, and we say we want 1 digit for the percentages. So let's run this entire code chunk and see the output. So here you can see we have the 3 columns that we were aiming for before, and we have negated male values both for axis count and for axis percent. Now that we have the correct axis values for the plot, we can go ahead and start plotting with ggplot2. Before we get to the ggplot2 section, I will mention that there are other alternatives to plotting these pyramids besides ggplot2. There's a package called apyramid, and it has a function called hpyramid, which allows you to directly plot line list data into a population pyramid, and you can skip the summarizing step. So I'll just show you an example of the code for that. So we start with the original line list data, not pyramid data. And then first you have to turn the age group variable into a factor because hpyramid requires a factor. And then we give it to the hpyramid function and tell it the main grouping variable and what to split the grouping variable by. Now when I run this code, and this is the resulting plot, you can see that it gives you the bars on the left side for females and on the right side for males, and it also gives you little lines for the midpoint of each group. You might think this is quite simple and it doesn't require the data summarization step. However, this package is quite limited in its functionality. It's not as customizable and versatile as ggplot2. And since we're already familiar with ggplot2 and the tidyverse, we can stick to the same syntax to create these bar plots. Now it's time for a practice question. This is a multiple choice question to test your understanding. So you can pause the video here, read over the question, and decide what your answer is going to be. The answer key is included at the end of the document. So once you've decided your answer, you can check if it's correct from the answer key. Now without further ado, let's get plotting. As we mentioned earlier, a demographic pyramid is a modified version of a stacked bar plot. The function to create a bar plot in ggplot2 is called geom_call, and we need to plot one categorical variable against a continuous variable. In our case, age group is the categorical variable, and we could use total, axis count, or axis percent as the numeric variable. What makes it stacked is that we assign fill color to a second categorical variable, in this case, sex. So let's look at an example of a simple stacked bar chart. So as usual, we will initialize the plot with the ggplot function, and then we'll give it geom_call to specify the type of graph we want to plot. So we'll put geom_call here, and then we specify the data set. We're going to use the already aggregated data set, pyramid data, for this plot. Okay. Then for our x variable, it's age group, and for our y variable, since we're creating the basic stacked bar plot and not the demographic pyramid, we'll use the total variable, and we'll fill by sex. And theme light just modifies the appearance. So when you run this code, this is the plot that you'll get, with age groups as the 14 categories, and the numeric variable on the y-axis, and then since we split by sex, those bars will be stacked on top of each other. To get closer to a demographic pyramid, we might want to make the bars horizontal. To do that, we can use the chord flip function in ggplot. So let me go ahead and add that as the final layer. Chord flip. If you run that, you get this, but now it's horizontal. So we're getting closer to a demographic pyramid. But now, instead of using the total column, which is all positive, we're going to use the axis counts column, which has male values as negative and female values as positive, so they'll start at 0 and be plotted in opposite directions. As we're using ggplot, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the functions and how they work, As basic ggplot syntax was already covered in our Introduction to Data Visualization course called Data on Display. So if you need to review ggplot basics, you can go back and refer to lessons in that course. So for the demographic pyramid, we're going to build on the stacked bar plot code that we just created above. This time we'll use axis count instead of total, since that has the negative male values. So here we have pretty much the exact same code as the stacked bar plot from earlier. The only difference is we're going to use axis counts instead of total, and I'm assigning this to an object called demo pyramid. This is so that we can build more layers onto this base plot in the next section. So let's run this whole code chunk and see what we get. By using the variable axis counts, which has negative male counts, we've adjusted the bars along the horizontal axis. So we use the same stacked bar plot code and just change it to the transformed variable that we prepared in the data preparation step with mutate. We can also create a similar demographic pyramid, but this time the units of the axis will be percentages, not the raw count totals. So we're going to use axis percent as our y variable. So we see that in the age group of 40 to 44, there were about 8% of the cases were from the females and about 6% were from males. So we can see that in the 40 to 44 age group, for the female bar, it's around 8%, and for the male bar, it's a little more than 6%. Now it's time for a couple of practice questions. You can pause the video here, read through these multiple choice questions, and you can check your answers in the answer key at the end of the document. Next, we have a coding practice question where you're going to use real data to make a demographic pyramid. So you'll run the first code chunk to load the data we've prepared into RStudio. This prepared data set has already aggregated age group, sex, and total counts of the national population of Zimbabwe for 2016. Once you've loaded the data set, you can create a demographic pyramid by filling in the blanks in the example code here. So far, you've learned how to create a basic demographic pyramid as shown here. To make the most of this visualization, there are some important customizations we can make, such as rescaling the x-axis, cleaning up some of the text, and adding titles and captions to the plot. In the next sections, we'll start by doing axis modifications, and then we'll go on to adding labels, and finally, we'll make aesthetic adjustments like changing the colors or the alignment of text. So let's start by customizing the axis. We're going to be customizing the continuous axis, here the horizontal axis called axis counts. The first thing to notice is that the axis is asymmetrical. We see that the female side on the right extends further than the male side on the left. If you look at the plot, you'll see that each line here represents 100. So we go from 0, 100, 200, 300, and a bit. So around 350 is where the right side ends. And on the left side, it's just around 300 where it ends. So in this plot, you can't see that it's super asymmetrical, but this will be important when you make your own plots, as you might have one side that extends way further compared to the other side. And this doesn't allow for the accurate comparison of the two different groups. So we want the two sides of the axes to mirror each other. We will adjust the axes to equal positive and negative values on either side to allow for a clear and accurate comparison of both sides. So we know that we want our axis to be symmetrical on both sides. That means the upper and lower limits of the axis should be the same length. But what should that length be? How do we pick a number to set for our upper and lower limits? So we're going to use the max function and then tell R to get the max of pyramid data, column total, which has our positive x-axis counts. So we look at max count, that is 318. Now that we have identified the max, we can use that to scale our axis. We're going to make changes to the axis using the scale y continuous axis from ggplot. You might wonder why we're using scale y continuous and not scale x continuous, and I'll explain that in a moment. So we're going to do 3 things inside scale y continuous. The first thing we're going to do is set the upper and lower limits to max count. Next, we're going to define the spacing between axis breaks. That means we're going to choose how frequently the numbers on the axis should show up. And lastly, we're going to make all of the numbers show up as positive. Right now, on the left side of the axis, the male counts show up as negative, like minus 200 cases, but obviously that's not possible. The total number is 200 cases, so we're going to remove those minus signs by setting it to the absolute value. So let's start coding. Okay, so in this code, we're going to start with our previous graph, demo pyramid, and assign it to a new ggplot object, custom axes. So we're going to build on demo pyramid and add more layers. So as I said, we're going to be using scale y continuous as the scale function to adapt demo pyramid. Inside the scale y continuous, we can perform our first task, setting the upper and lower axis limits. We use this with limits equals, and then we tell it the upper and lower limits. We're going to set these both to max count. And then we are going to set the frequency of breaks. Let's say we want the breaks to appear every 100. So we're going to set the breaks width to 100 with this breaks width function. And then lastly, we want the labels to appear positive, even though they're secretly negative on the left side. So I give the ABS function to labels. The ABS function stands for absolute. It creates absolute values from the negative and positive values. So let's run this code. And now we've created this object called custom axes. In order to view that, I'll paste custom axes here and run this code, and this is our resulting plot. You can see now that it is symmetrical on both sides. Both of them are around 350 on the left side and on the right side. We have the left side numbers converted to positive. There are no minus signs anymore. And before, we only had labels at 0 and 200 and minus 200. Now we have labels every 100 case counts. Let's compare the before and after by looking at these two plots side by side. So before we rescaled the axes, we had an asymmetrical axis with 350 on the right side and about 300 on the left side. Now it's symmetrical. They're both the same length on either side. We've removed the minus signs and we've added more frequent labeling so that we are clearer on what number we're looking at if we're just looking at the individual bars here. Here on the screen is a bullet point summary of how we made those changes using ggplot code. Scale functions have been covered in our intro ggplot, so I won't go into detail in them here, but you can pause and look at it if you'd like a deeper understanding of how the code created each one of these modifications. So although it looks like we just made changes to the x-axis, the horizontal axis, we were actually changing y-axis elements. How can this be? The code that we used to create the original demo pyramid plot, which we are now modifying, had x equals age group and y equals axis counts. We then later added chord flip to flip the x and y axes so they show up differently. This is why we need to use scale y continuous and not scale x continuous, because ggplot still considers the y-axis to be axis counts, though chord flip artificially manipulates those. So it might make more sense to actually plot y to age group and x to axis counts from the beginning. However, we usually plot the response variable as the y-axis, so through force of habit, that's why we plotted the bar plot in this orientation, but when you do your own coding, you can choose to swap the X and Y if it makes it less confusing for you. Alright, now it's time for the next step of customization, which is to add custom labels. What you see here is the previous plot that we created called custom axes. We're going to change some of the titles here, like the x-axis title, the y-axis title, sex, and words in the legend, so it looks cleaner and more presentable. So here we're going to build on the population pyramid we previously created, custom axes, and add the labs function to it, which allows us to add a title, subtitle, change the x and y axis labels from the original variable names to something more informative, and add a caption as well. So let's get started with that. To change the main title, we use the title argument inside labs, and I'm going to change the main title to HIV positive cases by age and sex. The x-axis title is going to be age group, and the y-axis title is going to be count or case count. Remember that because of chord flip, the x and y axes are switched. Now for the caption, we want to do something interesting. We're going to use the str glue function from the stringer package, which is part of the tidyverse, to say data are from a simulated line list. And then here what the stringer package allows us to do is insert some R code in here, and the output of that R code will be displayed in the caption. This is better seen with an example, so let me run the code and show you what comes up. In here, I'm going to say n row of the HIV cases data frame, which is our full simulated line list, and then that will give us the total number of cases from which this data was produced. So let's run this code to create custom labels and then view the product of custom labels. So now what you can see here is that the main title and subtitle have been edited as we expected. Age group and case count show up as we assigned for X and Y. And then for the caption, it says data are from simulated line list. Then it starts to a new line. It started a new line with this \n that creates a new line. And then n equals n row of HIV cases. So n equals 3,923 because that's the total number of people from our line list that this data was created from. So now we've added informative labels to our plot. And finally, it's time to make some stylistic adjustments to our plot. We're going to enhance the color scheme and theme elements of the plot, which means non-data elements of the plot. So again, we're going to build upon the previous plot, which we called custom labels, and make a new plot called custom color theme. First, we're going to use scale fill manual, which changes things in the fill legend. So the fill legend showed up on the right side of our plot. It said sex, male and female. So first, we're going to change the color values that fill the bars. So we're going to have female equals light blue and male equals dark blue. So that'll change the color of the bars. We also want to capitalize the legend labels. So instead of lowercase f, we want uppercase F for female and uppercase M for male. We're also going to make adjustments to the theme elements. So the theme function in ggplot allows us to specify really specific elements on the plot and how to modify those. So in theme, the axis line argument can change the X and Y axis look. So we're going to say that the line of the axis should be color black. So we're going to make the X and Y axis line colors black instead of the kind of light gray that we had before. Next, we're going to center the title and subtitle. So HJust stands for horizontal justification. And so for the plot title, the text, we're going to say horizontal justification equals 0.5, which means halfway through the plot, which will center it. Same for the plot subtitle, HJust equals 0.5. and then we can make some text formatting to the caption. So it used to be on the bottom right of the plot, which is the default in ggplot. We're going to say instead h_0, which means it goes all the way back to the left side of the plot. It's left aligned. We can increase the font size since it was pretty small, and then we can change the face to italic. You can set font face to italic, bold, etc. So now, once we run this code, we've created the custom color theme object, and then we just run the plot name to see the changes that we've made. So you can see the most noticeable difference is that the colors are different. Rather than the default ggplot teal and orange, we have light blue and dark blue as we asked for. We have centered the plot title that was previously left aligned. We have this darker black line for the X and Y axes. Here we've capitalized the legend text to be capital F female and capital M male. And here you can see that this caption is italicized. We can actually capitalize this sex word here as well. We would do that with the labs function. So let's quickly go back to here, and in the labs function, after y, we can add fill equals sex. This is the label for the fill legend. So we run this and look at custom labels. It has capital S on sex, and then if we rerun this code, we've got a capital S for sex here as well. So now the labels look much cleaner, more professional, and ready to add in your reports. Here's a side-by-side comparison of custom labels with custom color theme on the right. So you can pause here and take a detailed look at the exact modifications that have been made. You can look back at the code to try to match which line of code made each specific change. If you have any questions, you can always put them in the comments or review the code above. As we've seen, demographic pyramids are an essential tool for visualizing the distribution of specific diseases across age groups and sex. The concepts you learned in this lesson can also be applied to other kinds of graphs which require both positive and negative plotting for a continuous variable. These kind of bar plots are often used to compare percent increase or decrease in case positivity rates from year to year. Another example is percentage change in case notification rates. The application of these concepts is virtually endless. You can disaggregate by different combinations of demographic variables, not just age and sex. You can also use these plots to identify the effects of public health intervention programs and the effect that they've had. These kinds of analyses are really useful for epidemiological reporting and analysis. So congratulations for finishing this lesson, and we hope that you feel ready to apply these in real-life situations. Congratulations on finishing this lesson. We hope you now feel comfortable applying these ggplot2 skills to create demographic pyramids. This is just the first lesson on our series on epidemic reporting. You can visit thegraphcourses.org to see the rest of the lessons in this course. We hope to see you in the next lesson. Thank you and goodbye!